Berrien County Historical Museum in Nashville is widely known as the best little museum in Georgia. Its archive contains hundreds of artifacts and documents pertaining to the lives and events of the county residents. Each piece has its own story to tell, and for the next half hour or so, we'll be sharing a few of them with you. I will start with one of the smallest items in the museum, this little metal good luck charm called the Impoluck Medallion. It consists of a leprechaun-like figure surrounded by horseshoes and four-leaf clovers. This little charm character was the creation of Ernest M. McKesney, who mass-produced this item from 1922 to 1929. He sold the charm for 98 cents apiece and sold, quote-unquote, a jillion of them. McKesney was a prolific sculptor who was born in 1876 in Spencer, Indiana. His grandfather and father were both stone carvers, from whom Ernest McKesney learned his trade. Between 1905 and 1922, he spent in Americus, Georgia, designing and creating monuments at nearby Andersonville National Cemetery. In 1918, he began doing sketches on his most famous sculpture, the Spirit of the American Doughboy. At the close of World War I in 1918, every community in Berrien County lost a son, brother, or father when two troop carriers collided off the coast of Scotland, sinking the HMS Otranto and killing 431 of its passengers, including 25 from Berrien County. McKesney saw the tremendous opportunity to create a monument honoring the lives of those soldiers and all soldiers who lost their lives in the war to end all wars. In 1921, the very first molding of the Spirit of the American Doughboy sculpture was fabricated and placed on a 14-foot granite pedestal in the center of the intersection of Marion Avenue and Davis Street. It was later moved onto the grounds of the old county courthouse, and though it resides outside of the building, we now claim it is the largest item in the museum's collection. The oldest pieces of furniture in the museum collection are the large sets of court filing drawers that contain thousands of court proceeding documents dating to the first decade of 1900. A casual observation of the contents of one of those drawers revealed this serious offense. On the afternoon of October 4th, 1907, a killing occurred near the stock pens in the town of Adel, then in Berrien County, at the crossing of the Georgia Southern and Florida Railway tracks. The victim was discovered by the tracks shortly after 4 o'clock in the evening, after the southbound passenger train had passed through. It was also a tragedy because she was pregnant and near birth. The only witness to the event was Charlie Dukes, a colored man who was working at the Adel Manufacturing Company planing mill nearby. He said he had observed the victim for about 15 minutes before the train came by. As the train drew near where she was standing, about 300 feet up the tracks, it blew its horn. But according to the testimony of Mr. Dukes, quote, the train struck her before she could get across, killing her. I don't know that she was trying to commit suicide, but she did not move until the train approached her, close quote. J.A.J. Parrish arrived at the scene shortly after the body was found and stated she was badly bruised as well as deceased. Oh, by the way, did I mention that the victim was a cow that was owned by J.A.J. Parrish? Parrish was the man who was the plaintiff in the case, suing the Georgia Southern and Florida Railway for $50 or more, as the cow was a good cow and about to have a calf. The Justice of the Peace, J.J. Parrish, a cousin to the plaintiff, found judgment for the plaintiff, awarding him the $50. However, the Georgia Southern and Florida Railway appealed the ruling on grounds that the plaintiff did not provide evidence of the mental state of the cow as to whether it was trying to commit suicide, so the railroad could not be held liable. Judge Robert G. Mitchell agreed and ordered the case dismissed, and plaintiff was charged $1.90 court costs. Among the museum collections are a large number of vintage postcards ranging from serene landscapes or historical locations to cultural commentary and humor. Postcards in America became a craze after their introduction at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. Soon publishers were printing cards with images of places where people were from or had traveled to. The public loved the postcard idea, but the cost to mail a postcard was 2 cents, the same cost to mail a letter. So in 1898, Congress dropped the cost to a penny, and the postcard boom began. In 1905, parlor albums filled with postcards from friends and relatives were second in importance only to the family Bible. At first, postal regulations permitted only the name and address of the recipient on the back, so by necessity, messages defaced the illustrated side. In 1907, however, the Post Office Department relented. The back of the postcard could be split down the middle to provide space for both correspondence and addresses. Perhaps the oldest collection of postcards in the museum are these cartoon postcards from the 1908-1910 era. Each card has a double entendre message and illustration, plus a space to help the writer clarify its meaning. A few like these have a romantic twist. I got mine, a hobo drinking a whole keg of beer. A charming girl, a beautiful snake charmer. I got the dirty end, a ditch digger tossing a shovel of dirt into a high-style gent. And finally, when I'm sad, I sing, with 2 cats howling. The 4 other postcards from the series are these more questionable thoughts whose writer would definitely need clarification of their message. I'm a little bored, a wooden board with a drill bit driven through it. My time is short, with the prisoner in a jail cell for short-term inmates. I shall do something desperate, a madman with a bomb in one hand and a knife in the other, and I've been hustling for a living, with an often used racial character running with a stolen bird. These 1910-1915 era postcards from the museum collection show that children were included in the postcard craze, especially at Christmas time. What could be more proof positive than Santa Claus was planning a trip to a child's home than to receive a handwritten message on a postcard from the dear old elf himself? This Dear Little Folks series of postcards for children encouraged the youngsters to be good, hang their stockings up good and strong, and go to bed early. One even promised that Santa was going to stop at their home first. Mom could read cursive and ad-lib anything else that needed to be addressed. Though the message could be made to sound sweet and comforting to the little folks by their mother's voice, the stern look of these sadists may have put the fear into them as well. Just recently, this postcard of downtown Nashville in 1909 was discovered on eBay. Though the foundation does not often purchase pieces of Berrien history, this view of Davis Street looking south from the upstairs of the Landmark building was one that we did not have in our collection, so a modest price was paid to include it. The photo shows Davis Street reaching to the edge of downtown, which was McPherson Avenue in 1909. Without question, the largest event ever in Berrien County history that was photographed and experienced countywide was the 1956 centennial celebration of Berrien County's creation. Between February 20th to the 25th, each day featured a Wild West show, midway attractions, bands and parades, and performances of the pageant Berrien on the Wings of Time. To ensure that the community caught the proper spirit of things, a kangaroo court was assembled to hold hearings on those who failed to follow the rules. Even vendors and peddlers were expected to catch the spirit, and were obliged to pay $1 and wear this peddler's permit pin, which permitted them to, quote, sell, trade, purvey, tell lies, shoot the bull, etc., unquote. Almost every family who lived in the county at that time had photographs taken of themselves or their parents or grandparents in their pioneer attire. Most of the women made their own dresses and bonnets for themselves and their daughters. On Saturday, February 25th, most families decked themselves out in their pioneer attire and headed for the downtown square. The women of the county who were attired in the dress code of the day were assembled under the banner of Centennial Bells. These sisters of the swish pins were worn by most of the women who participated and adhered to the Centennial celebration rules. The gentlemen of the county had spent a month or more trying to grow facial hair and gathered on Saturday to show off their masculine achievement. Though not as attractively presented as the sisters of the swish, they still showed off their new growth and proudly wore their Brothers of the Brush pins. The occasion of the centennial celebration also brought about the first attempt at compiling a published history of Berrien County. Chairman of the History Committee, Nell Whaley, did the best she could in a short period of time, but it was not a very thorough coverage of the subject. However, the images and information contained within it have been useful many times over for almost 70 years. At the end of the 19th century, the growth and success of the economy of South Georgia was heavily dependent on the turpentine operations and subsequently the lumber mills. In the early 1900s, there were at least 86 lumber mills situated on the line of the Georgia and Florida Railroad running from Augusta, Georgia to Madison, Florida, some 250 miles. A big sawmill was situated on the railroad about a mile above Ray City at a stop known as Lucky. First operated under the name Lucky Lumber Company, it was owned by William F. Lucky. About 1911, William Lucky sold out to Levy J. Clements and Sons. The Clements may have continued to operate under the name Lucky Lumber Company for several more years, as late as March of 1915. While residents of the sawmill town had access to all goods and services in Ray City, just a mile south on the Georgia-Florida tracks. The sawmill company also operated a commissary where workers could shop. However, most of the workers were paid in script or tokens that were used by the sawmill company. These could be redeemed at full value at the company commissary, but were discounted 10 to 20% if they were used in town. Sometime between 1915 and 1923, Clements partnered up with possibly Thomas J. Studstill, owner of a log hauling business, to form Clements and Studstill Lumber Company. They paid part of their workers with these aluminum tokens that are now in the museum collection. They were stamped in the common denominations of $1, 50 cents, 25 cents, 10 cents, and 5 cents. In February of 1923, Clements sold the sawmill to the Jackson Brothers Lumber Company for $75,000. However, in November of 1923, a huge fire broke out in the sawmill and destroyed most of their cut lumber. The company recovered briefly, but the damage was done. Another sawmill operation in Ray City was the Ray City Lumber Company, which probably cut lumber for a short period after the Jackson Lumber Company fire. They too used token payments to their employees. These tokens are also in the museum collection. However, token and script payments to employees was outlawed in 1938 by the U.S. Congress, and these tokens are now only relics of the past. Almost everyone remembers Margie Tigert, who was celebrated as the Butterfly Girl, just because she was always flittering from one location to another, or from one project to another, and always in service to the community to make it more beautiful and a pleasant place to live. So it is no wonder that this energetic lady still found time to become a census enumerator for Berrien County in the 1970 United States Census. The role of a census taker required several hours of training, learning how to fill out the intimidating census forms, and several more weeks of actually canvassing the assigned households. Each canvassing route consisted of 30 or 40 families to interview, and each household had to fill out a multiple-page questionnaire. The U.S. Census Bureau provided each enumerator an identification badge and a vinyl pouch that identified that person as an official enumerator. This 1970 census pouch that was assigned to Margie Tigert is now in the museum collection. Studies after the 1960 census revealed that the census had undercounted certain segments of the population. Researchers also noted a growing distrust of government and resistance to responding to the census. In an effort to reduce the complexity of the product, the Census Bureau reduced the number of questions on the long-form questionnaire from 66 to 23. Even though the number of questions was shorter, it was still 7 pages long. Most families only answered the basic questions: name of each household member, their sex, and date of birth. However, 15% of the population gave additional information, and another 5% gave even more information, all at the direction of the enumerator. Among the questions on the smaller sample enumerations included the household member's birthplace, his or her parents' birthplace, whether they were naturalized citizens or alien, and what language they spoke in the home. These questions have been part of the U.S. Census since 1850. However, they were not allowed in the 2020 U.S. Census. When I asked Margie why she had saved her carrying pouch for all these years, she chuckled and said, "Well, I thought maybe I could use it in a floral arrangement sometime." I'm sure if the opportunity had ever presented itself, she would have created a masterpiece. In the museum's countertop display that was once the landmark fudge and confectionery case are some of the most rare and historically relevant documents in the museum collection. The oldest document is an 1841 letter penned by Andrew Jackson's former U.S. Attorney General, John McPherson Berrien. It is a correspondence from Attorney General Berrien to a Dr. Edward Ambrose Baber of Macon, Georgia. Therein, Berrien tries to allay Dr. Baber's fear and frustration he had expressed regarding the delay of his appointment as U.S. Charge d'Affaires in Italy. Berrien stated he personally had provided Secretary of State Daniel Webster a letter of recommendation for Dr. Baber and had no doubts that President John Taylor would confirm it. This concern came from the fact that President William Henry Harrison had died in office in April of 1841. John Tyler became president, being the first vice president to succeed the presidency after the death of his predecessor. President Tyler did confirm the diplomatic appointment, and Dr. Baber fulfilled the office of U.S. Charge d'Affaires from 1841 to 1844. However, he would have been better served to have remained in Italy. Dr. Baber returned to the United States and continued his medical practice in Macon, Georgia. In the spring of 1846, one of Dr. Baber's patients was suffering from a chronic illness. Dr. Baber wrote a prescription for the antidote, carefully copying the dosage information from the Ellis Formula Guide before sending the prescription off to the druggist. However, the druggist questioned the formula and attached a beware note to the vial before giving it to the patient. When the patient saw the beware note, he decided not to take the medication. When the doctor later called on his patient, he was a bit aggravated with the druggist. To prove to his patient that the medication was safe, Dr. Baber took a dose of the prescription, whereupon Dr. Baber died almost immediately. As it turned out, the pharmacist's book, the Ellis Formulary Guide, had a typographical error that included an overdose of a cyanide ingredient. However, all copies of the book were immediately recalled and corrected, but too late for the unfortunate Dr. Baber. You can probably tell what generation you were born in if you remember going to the grocery store or hardware store and having your purchases tabulated by a self-scanner, a clerk scanner, or a clerk using an electric scanner, or a clerk using a manual cash register. This latter is how many of you have recollection. The term "ring me up" came from the sound of the register when the drawer opened to accept your cash payment. But each of these methods required the price of each item, or the size of the item, or the quantity of the item, or even whether you were going to pay cash or pay on credit. The seller had to make that determination based on figuring each of those elements in his sales price. He had to reckon what it would cost. That is not a Southern expression, though it is often attributed to that region. It actually is from the Old English word reckon, which means calculate. In the late 1800s through the early 1900s, many merchants, bankers, manufacturers, mechanics, farmers, and wholesalers depended on this 1917 item from our museum collection called the Ready Reckoner Form and Logbook. Herein are charts that spell out the cost of any item on any quantity up to 1,000, or the rates of wages from 50 cents a week to $15 a week. If the customer was paying on credit, the book shows the interest charged per day for any amount from $1 up to $12,000 at 6% simple interest. It also contains proper business forms for issuing a check or making an invoice or a receipt. There is an extensive section on determining the charge for lumber by width, length, and thickness based on per inch for each board. The chart also shows how many boards can be cut from a plank and how many planks are in a rounded log, depending on the size of each. And finally, it shows how much per pound is paid for each pound of cotton, cattle, hogs, sheep, and flour, from 4 cents to 30 cents, and every eighth of a penny between. I reckon we should be grateful we don't have to wait for the store clerk to check his ready reckoner to find out how much a dozen cookies at 49 cents each is going to cost us. It's $5.88 plus tax. On July 2, 1933, in Nashville, Georgia, a young 28-year-old doctor from South Carolina, William Waugh Turner, was wedded to Ruby Gaskins, the pretty 22-year-old daughter of Alva W. Gaskins of Nashville. A.H. Giddens, the Baptist minister, conducted the ceremony. Shortly after the wedding, Dr. Turner set up his medical practice in the upstairs of the McLean building on Courthouse Square. Dr. Turner was a progressive-thinking practitioner and immediately realized that Nashville and the surrounding communities did not have an adequate facility that he could conduct surgery or deliver babies. However, his father-in-law owned a 2-story building just off the square on North Davis Street. In July 1935, Dr. Turner announced plans to open a hospital in the upstairs of his father-in-law's building. It had been used as the offices of the county agricultural agent and relief services. His hospital would consist of 5 bedrooms, an operating room, a sterilization room, and white and black waiting rooms. His private practice office was also included in the remodeling. The Turner Hospital opened its doors in late September 1935. Meanwhile, Dr. and Mrs. Turner were building their first home together on Bartow Street, just south of today's post office. It was here they raised their 3 children, Elaine, Waugh, and Alethea. Alethea died in 2003, and Elaine passed away in 2022, and Waugh in 2023. In 2024, while cleaning out the vacant residence, the family came across the sign that most likely hung outside the first Turner Hospital entrance. The sign is a 22-inch by 22-inch heavy cast metal with a horse and doctor's carriage and a silhouetted profile. It is a double-sided sign that reads, Hospital, Dr. W. W. Turner on both sides. It still has its hanging brackets, though quite rusty. It has been donated to the Berrien Historical Museum, courtesy of the Waugh Turner Estate. In July 1937, Dr. Turner took over both floors of the hospital building. He added X-ray, laboratory, and expanded waiting rooms on the lower level, still with white and black patients in separate accommodations. The upstairs space contained 10 bedrooms, along with an operating room and obstetrics room as well. The hospital opened for services in August of 1937. In 1940, Dr. P.H. Askew Jr. began creating plans for a new hospital with all functions and accommodations on one level. In January of 1941, the Askew Memorial Hospital, one of the nicest small community hospitals in the region, was open and receiving patients. In May of 1944, Dr. W. Turner sold the Turner Hospital building to the Duncan Masonic Lodge. The downstairs were occupied by the Nashville Herald and the upstairs by the Masonic Lodge. Today, the Askew Memorial Hospital is no more, and though the old Turner Hospital building is still standing, it is vacant. Now, the only thing that remains of either is the old Dr. W. Turner Hospital sign, where it resides in its new home in the Berrien Historical Museum in Nashville. I hope you've enjoyed seeing a few of these items from the museum collection and the stories about them, and we invite you to join us again for more stories from the best little museum in Georgia.